so close to a cure.
How am I going to manage through grad school?
At this very moment, UBC researchers, teachers, students, alumni, and donors are changing the world around us.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Todd, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni UBC and the Associate Vice President of Alumni at the University of British Columbia. And what an absolutely terrific audience and a superb way to kick off the sixth season of our provocative Alumni UBC Dialogues, presented by our media and broadcast sponsor, CBC, and our presenting sponsor, Scotiabank. We're really extremely grateful for the tremendous support of these important discussions in the community by our partners at Scotiabank and CBC. So please join me in saying a warm thank you to both. Additionally, we want to thank the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs for their participation in tonight's activities. To say a few words and bring greetings, I hope you'll join me in welcoming UBC alumna Christina Anthony, who's the founder and chair of FWE and a past recipient of the Alumni UBC Outstanding Young Alumnus Achievement Award. Christina?
Thank you, Jeff. We at FWE are so proud to be co-presenting tonight's event, and thanks, Fred, wherever you are, for asking us. We really appreciate it. As a nonprofit that educates and mentors women entrepreneurs, women in leadership is naturally a topic that's very near and dear to our hearts. Over the past 12 years, we've been so inspired by these women who decide to lead their companies, lead their teams, and lead their industries. Each year, we help over 1,500 women through our programs, such as the FWE Mentor Program and our 3-day intensive educational e-series program. We celebrate women who are role models and connect our members with other leaders in the community. That's why FWE is honored to be part of this evening and this important dialogue. And I'm so thrilled to have many of my friends up here in the panel. And I want to single out one in particular, one of my mentors, John Montalbano, who helped me when I was very green, starting out in the wild world of finance. And now he's taken this role of helping women to a whole other amazing level with the Professor of Leadership Studies at Sauder. So on behalf of all of us, John, thank you for doing that. Please enjoy your evening.
Thanks, Christina. That's great. And, you know, I have to say, this is such a fantastic turnout tonight, and I want to thank all of you for carving out some time to join us. I have a question. How many of you are attending your very first dialogue? Wow, that's great. I think that is more than a majority of the room. So welcome to all of you, and you're in for a real treat tonight. I'd also like to extend a really warm welcome to our cyberspace audience, because we're live streaming tonight's conversation, and it's great to have all of you join us wherever you are in the world. And I also invite all of you online to share your thoughts and questions with us via Twitter, and the Twitter handle is @AlumniUBC, and the hashtag is UBC Dialogues. I also just want to make a couple of really brief introductions this evening. First, you've already heard John Montalbano's name mentioned, but I also want to just recognize him. He's going to be on the panel, but he's also the chair of UBC's Board of Governors. So, John, thank you for all that you do for UBC. Thank you. We also have the Dean of the Sauder School of Business, Robert Helsley. Bob, I saw you earlier, and there he is. So, well, Bob, thank you for joining us. And I also want to introduce Michael Lee, who's the Vice Chair of the Alumni UBC Board of Directors. Michael, right down here. Michael, thank you. So by now, you no doubt know we've been engaged in a Canadian first at UBC. 3 years ago, we publicly launched an ambitious fundraising and alumni engagement campaign called Start an Evolution. And we had twin goals: to raise $1.5 billion for student learning, research, and community engagement initiatives in Vancouver and in the Okanagan, and to involve 50,000 of our alumni in the life of the university on an annual basis by 2015. This is, in fact, more than doubling alumni engagement. So as of today, more than $1.3 billion have been raised, and we met our goal in engaging 50,000 individual alumni with UBC in the last year. So thanks to you, our alumni, donors, and friends, we really look forward to hitting our campaign targets and ending the campaign on schedule in 2015. Collectively, we will have achieved what we set out to do. And there's still more work to be done, of course, and we continue to need your help and participation, but your efforts are making an enormous difference in the life of UBC for our students, our faculty, and the wider community of BC, Canada, and the world. We're also delighted to announce that we will be opening the doors to the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center, a home for alumni for life. It's going to be right at the heart of the Vancouver campus, and it'll open next spring. It's named in honor of one of UBC's most dedicated and enthusiastic alumni, and the center is scheduled for completion in April 2015. The new 41,000 square foot Alumni Center will be the first of its kind in Canada and a living symbol of the partnership between UBC and its alumni and the critical role our alumni play in the life of the university. It will be a key resource for our 300,000 global alumni community as they do business, expand their careers, satisfy their intellectual, cultural, and social appetites, and engage in activities to enhance society, and not to mention just connecting with other alumni, students, and faculty. And tonight, I'm happy to announce the premiere of a short video. It's still in production, but you're going to get to see it first, and it showcases what the new space has to offer. And it's great to see this Alumni Center coming to life, and we're really happy to share with you its availability for bookings now. So please direct your attention to the screen for a brief video.
The Robert H. Lee Alumni Center is a brand new meeting and social space in the heart of UBC's campus. At our stunning location just minutes from downtown Vancouver, we offer facilities for meetings, workshops, conferences, and social events for just a few people to up to 400. Booking with us gives you more than just a place to meet. We're within walking distance of world-class gardens, museums, and attractions you can add to your experience. You can hold team-building activities in Pacific Spirit Park or the surrounding beaches, or you can unwind with a round at the UBC Golf Club. And within our walls, customized learning from some of the brightest minds in Canada is available. It all adds up to memorable and productive experiences that will last a lifetime. Looking for help planning your next business meeting, corporate retreat, or social function? Our experienced event managers and on-site supervisors will help bring it to life. And the day your guests arrive, our concierge service will ensure they are greeted upon arrival and receive assistance whenever they need it. Looking for the perfect space to match your group size? We have a number of first-rate choices. Our foyer can be used as a reception area or a display space for up to 300 guests. Our light-filled celebration space is perfect for up to 400. Our spacious boardroom has seating for over 30 people, and our library is a great spot for an intimate cocktail reception. We also have classrooms and flexible workspaces that are perfect for planning sessions or interviews. All include AV support. While full-service catering is always an option, for informal gatherings and meals, we have a modern cafe and lounge specializing in fresh local fare and sustainable cuisine. At the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center, everyone is welcome. You don't have to be a UBC graduate to reserve space, but if you are, preferred rates apply. Meet, connect, celebrate. The Robert H. Lee Alumni Center at the University of British Columbia opens spring 2015 and is accepting bookings now.
So I'm sure you're going to agree with me that we have a fabulous new facility underway, and we really are looking forward to welcoming all of you to their permanent home on campus. So we encourage you to take active use of this great resource. So why Alumni UBC Dialogues? Well, our alumni have consistently told us they want to hear from their alma mater in the communities where they live and on issues that matter to them. We at Alumni UBC also know from recent work we've been engaged in to better understand what is of the greatest importance to you, our alumni, are programs, services, and communications that really facilitate lifelong enrichment. So our alumni want to make a positive impact in their community and around the world, and we want to support you in those efforts to make a difference, individually and collectively. So this evening, we'll hear from alumni and community experts who are leaders in their field. And on behalf of UBC, I welcome and thank them for their time and talent this evening. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Scotiabank's Mary Stoichevsky, who's the manager at the Broadway and Broad branch, to introduce tonight's moderator. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And good evening, everyone. I am thrilled to be here tonight to welcome you to UBC Dialogues. Scotiabank is once again proud to be partnering with our friends at UBC on this fantastic series of events. Like UBC Dialogues, Scotiabank believes that different ideas and points of view contribute to a strong and healthy society, and that fosters an inclusive culture celebrating talent and diversity. It contributes to a brighter future. Tonight, you are in for a real treat, and we will be hearing from another outstanding lineup of panelists. It is now my pleasure to welcome our moderator for the evening, a veteran broadcaster and journalist based here in Vancouver. Gloria Makarenko is the host of Our Vancouver, a current affairs show on CBC television. She's also host of The Story From Here, a national Radio 1 show which brings Canadians the most lively and intriguing interviews from across the country. To help us explore and better understand the topic of why there aren't more women in leadership roles, please welcome tonight's moderator, Gloria Makarenko.
Hello, and welcome to all of you. It is a great pleasure for me to be here and be part of this very important dialogue. And I'm so glad that you chose to be here rather than at the Katy Perry concert. A little bit more exciting, a little bit more flamboyant perhaps, but I think this is going to carry a lot more weight overall in your lives. Now, for decades, women have been fighting for workplace equality, and in many sectors, yes, progress has been apparent. In other places, progress has been slow, too slow. But in boardrooms and executive offices across the country, there does obviously remain a noticeable absence of women in senior leadership positions. So tonight we're going to explore just what lies behind that gender imbalance. So is it deeply ingrained biases that we all carry? Or is it by the people that are making those appointments that have those biases? Or are some women simply choosing to forego the kinds of responsibilities that go with those leadership opportunities for career paths that perhaps offer greater flexibility? Well, we have 5 amazing speakers that you're going to be listening to throughout this evening. I've had a chance to get to know them a little bit over the last little while, and oh my goodness, some of the stories they have to share are incredible on very many levels, actually, very practical levels. I do want to, though, give this conversation a little bit of framing, put it into a little bit of context for you. So I have some statistics that I want to thank one of our panelists, Jennifer Burdell, for putting this together. She's from the Sauder School of Business, and she's come up with some interesting statistics. Women represent 47% of the Canadian labor force and 36% of senior management positions. Women represent only 4.8% of Fortune 500 CEO positions. 4.8%. Out of a ranking of 43 countries, Canada ranks 14th in percentage of female board chairs. That's only 4.1%. We are 16th out of 44 countries when you take into consideration all board members. 12.1% of all board seats are held by women. And when you delve even deeper, BC ranks the lowest out of all provinces, only 11.9%. We have a lot more interesting data, which we will reveal throughout the evening as well, but I want to leave that more for the discussion of our panelists, and it's my pleasure now to welcome them to the stage. And as they get comfortable up here on stage, I'm going to introduce each one of them. UBC awarded Dr. Martha Piper an honorary degree in 2007, following 9 years as the first female UBC president and vice chancellor. She is currently a member of the board of directors of the Bank of Montreal and TransAlta Corporation. She also serves as a board member of Care Canada, the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education, and the Canadian Stem Cell Foundation. Dr. Martha Piper at the far end of the stage. Maninder Dhaliwal graduated from UBC with a master's degree in electrical engineering. She's vice president of the Pacific Autism Family Center Foundation, previously served as executive director of TradeWorks. Maninder serves on the board of directors at Vancouver Board of Trade and Ballet BC, and is a member of the UBC Alumni Association Advisory Council. Welcome to you, Maninder. His name has already come up this evening, but let's hear a little bit more about John Montalbano. He's the man on the stage. He received his, and yes, we do have a helmet for you, if you need that a little bit later on. He received his Bachelor of Commerce from UBC, serves as chair of the UBC Board of Governors. He's CEO of RBC Global Asset Management. And in keeping with his commitment to developing talented youth in Canada, John has established several fellowships, serves on several boards, and is associated with many organizations right across the country. John Montalbano. Anne Giardini, you may have heard Anne on with Rick Clough this morning on CBC Radio. Anne received her Bachelor of Laws from UBC and was president of Weyerhaeuser Company Limited until this past June, is now a director, and has just begun her term as Chancellor of Simon Fraser University. She's a member of several boards. I don't have enough time to list them all, including, not limited to, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative Incorporation, the Thompson Creek Metals Company, and Penn Canada. And finally, Anne Giardini. Yes, you deserve your round of applause, of course. And finally, Jennifer Berdahl joined UBC Sauder School of Business this past spring as the Montalbano Professor of Leadership Studies, Women, and Diversity. So she has studied gender in organizations for more than 20 years, with research examining power and status in work groups, workplace harassment and discrimination, and the work-family interface. So please give Jennifer and all of our panelists a very warm welcome. Okay, so I'll just give you a little bit of an idea of how the evening is going to unfold for the next 30 minutes. I will get the discussion going with our panelists, and we'll throw around some initial ideas, but I do want to include you in this discussion, and those of you who also are joining us online and via Twitter, please feel free to tweet in your questions and join the conversation as well. We will follow this 30-minute discussion with your questions, and then we will follow the entire evening with a little reception and hopefully get to chat a little bit more closely with each one of you. Okay, not each one of you. Some of you who'd like to chat a little bit. So only the stage and the speakers are going to be filmed for this event. This is a recording that's going to be going on live, but don't worry, you don't have to worry about adjusting your lipstick or fixing your hair or anything like that. The video will be available on Alumni UBC's digital library at alumni.ubc.ca. So also, as Jeff mentioned, don't turn off your phones. Feel free to tweet the event while you're sitting there as well to @AlumniUBC, #UBC Dialogues. And for the Q&A period, you are welcome to tweet your questions from home, as I mentioned. Okay, let's get started. What we thought would be kind of a good way to get things rolling is to give each of the panelists about a minute. I'm being a little loose on that, but just some initial brief comments about the question that is the overriding question of today's discussion. Why aren't there more women in leadership roles? Jennifer Berdahl, why don't you kick things off?
Okay, well, thank you very much for letting me begin. It's very hard to summarize in 1 minute the answer to that question, but I will try in 2 minutes. So my answer to the question of why gender imbalance in leadership continues is both deeply ingrained biases that we all share, including those making the decisions to appoint, and women choosing to forego leadership opportunities. These biases and these choices feed off each other. It is one thing to write laws, and it is quite another thing to change our economic structures and our cultural norms. And so that is really the challenge that we face. So we're born into a world that is run by men and quickly learn that leadership is associated with men and masculinity, and to value masculinity above femininity. And then those stereotypes about what a leader looks like, what a leader acts like, what men and women are good at or interested in become our values. So we start valuing those roles. So as we social psychologists put it, the descriptive becomes prescriptive. So we start thinking that a leader should look and act like they do, that men and women should be good at or should be interested in the things that are stereotyped with them. And then these descriptive stereotypes, these associations we all have, drive bias in our training, in what we seek out in our selection and promotion processes. The prescriptive stereotypes, the values component to it, tends to drive and shape workplace culture and the treatment that employees experience. And it all starts in childhood at the playground. So you have the confident and assertive girl being called the B word, like bossy or bitch. And you have the sensitive and caregiving boy called a G word, like girly or gay. We have boys who challenge authority and break the rules, being admired by their peers. They're the future entrepreneurs, convicts, or both. And we have boys who follow the rules, and authority being the good sons. They're the next promotion or president. On the other hand, the good girl is placed on a pedestal, protected but disempowered, while the bad girl is vilified and fair game for sexual harassment. So this socialization directs our interests and our aspirations, and we carry them with us into the workplace, sometimes more subtly than on the playground. Women often face a trade-off between love and power, and most choose love. They go where they are socially rewarded and appreciated, into female-dominated occupations, assistant positions, or if they can afford it, the home. Men face a different set of challenges. For men, love and power often coincide. But most men aren't going to get to the top. What happens to those who don't? They may find other ways to feel like a man, some healthy, some not. Today, men's involvement is needed more than ever in the home as wives become breadwinners, but organizational structures and norms don't support fathers as they do mothers. So at this point, men are actually now reporting more work-life conflict than women. So in sum, our cultural biases and institutions continue to encourage women to choose or leave to scale back at work, and men to choose or leave to scale back at home. And this dynamic is mutually reinforcing. So we really need to talk about men also if we're going to solve the problem. That would be my summary.
Good start.
Not 1 minute.
You've got us off on a great foot. Anne, what are some of your thoughts?
Yes, well, I could echo to some extent what we've just heard, but perhaps reframe it. I believe we are all subject to the dominant narrative. And the dominant narrative is what we get from birth until probably our last breath. And the dominant narrative is, of course, to some extent as you describe it. And it takes a very independent-minded woman to reposition herself within that narrative, and frankly, independent-minded men to envision her and put her and help her to be in a very different role. I prefer to use the word narrative rather than bias, because bias is so loaded, and we all have them. And I often refer people, they can Google Harvard and implicit bias, and you can take a few tests for free on this website, which can test your bias with respect to men and women in the workplace, ageism, sizeism, all kinds of different things that you may feel as though you have no bias or no implicit preference for, but it does kind of tease them out. And I also think, so you have to be very independent, both as men and women, to place a woman into a position of leadership. I think we have many ways for women to get off the track. Maternity is an obvious one, caring for parents, volunteer work, the myriad things that women tend to do. And very few ways to get back in. And also during the critical period of time when women are developing what will ultimately be leadership skills, they have competing priorities. Love. I'm glad you mentioned love, which is not a bad priority. Family, another very good priority, and other things. And so, women, there's often for women quite a lot sacrificed, or they feel there is, if they commit themselves fully to what will ultimately be a leadership track.
Okay, thank you very much. We want to hear from the man on the panel now, too. John, why do you think there aren't more women in leadership roles?
I feel like I'm going to get special treatment.
Yeah.
I was excited about this.
We're glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. And actually, if I can just put my UBC hat on just for 1 minute. Thank you all for being here, because a great university needs an engaged alumni, so thank you very much for taking the time of the evening to be with us tonight. I will follow on with some of the comments that have already been made. When I think about running a business, and especially in the financial services, which tends to be quite a traditional business of many centuries, really, my observation is that business today, and services businesses in particular, are still fashioned after what I call the traditional institutional normal model of the traditional Anglo-Saxon business model. And they tend to have the very male-dominant traits that would identify what good leadership looks like. And the model hasn't evolved, in my mind, for a number of different reasons. Number one, traditional behaviors continually be rewarded. I remember, and this is going to be the same for pretty much all the banks. When we got acquired, I'm looking at the leadership of the bank, and pretty much they were all 6'5" white males, and they all had gone to Harvard. And and I was looking up there and thinking, man, there's not one bald dude up there at all. and then they were all exceptional at what they did. And so, not to take anything away from the leadership that was in place, but you can see firsthand that it was actually the traditional model at work. And despite the efforts of, and I think very sincere efforts, to ensure that all the resources that were inherently possible by the business to ensure greater diversity was at play, but somehow it wasn't translating itself into practice. And so in fairness, I started to look at our own practices, and sure enough, we weren't any different. And my management team is male-dominated. And so feeling that, we can't just sit here and tick the boxes, I think another great issue is there's not a lot of productive work, with all due respect to Jennifer right now, that's easily accessible that tells you how to solve for the problem. I ventured out to say, okay, you know what, I do not want to sponsor an event that brings everyone together, we talk about the problem, we feel good about the fact that we've identified the issue without then somehow presenting a solution. And I've reached out to a number of people in business to find out what they were doing. A number of the women in our firm who for many years had gone to women's networking events on leadership, and they all came back with, there's a problem. And I said, I know, but what's the solution? So I said, you know what, I'll do it myself. I'll do the research myself. And I couldn't find any research. There's an exceptional amount of work identifying where the problems exist, but precious little on terms of how to fix it. And so I think there's, the good news is we've all come to the conclusion that we haven't gotten anywhere great, as your stats highlighted. And now, finally, people are saying it's now time to move on from saying, look, there's a problem. People have heard. People do sincerely wish to make a difference. But now we need solutions. We need to understand how to change the significant barriers that have existed, frankly, for centuries in our traditional industries, to remove the barriers for women and people, I would argue, of visible minorities to move through the organization. And it's for that reason when we set up the professorship that we thought it was very important not only to mention women, but also diversity, because through the course of the work that I had personally undertaken to find out, what can we do better, because we're guilty as well. I had a number of people who are, within the category of visible minorities, men, who said, you know what, that women problem that you're highlighting, it's exactly how I feel. It took me all the way back to when I was 16, I grew up in East Vancouver, a multicultural society. I was the only white guy on the street, so we had, the whole world, the United Nations was on our block. And my team amalgamated with the Kerrisdale Roadrunner team, and because we couldn't beat North Delta, so the top two teams came together and said, okay, we'll join and beat those guys. And so you had half the team come from East Vancouver and the other half on the west side. And so I remember going there, always being the captain of my teams, and for the first time, I was barely acknowledged. Even though I loved my teammates, I was barely acknowledged. And I remember coming back on the bus with my friend Amber Manhouse, and I said to Amber, I said, I don't get it. I just don't feel like I have a voice. And he starts laughing, and he goes, man, on this side of the tracks, pointing to East Van, you're the white dude. On that side of the tracks, you're the immigrant dude, right? So we looked at each other, we started laughing. Well, good thing we're dudes, right? That was it. That was the summation of the problem. And years later, the same thing is happening in the boardrooms where people are saying, look, I have all this ability, and there's something going on despite your best efforts, and all the stuff you say, John, it's not translating into an outcome. So I think that, for me, from an empirical experience, it's the institutional norms that are in place that we somehow have to get over.
Well, hopefully we'll get closer to some of those solutions tonight. So thanks for the view from the east side, dude. Works well. Maninder Dhaliwal, I'd like to hear just, again, we acknowledge that there needs to be a solution, but let's just look at the core cause of why this problem exists in the first place.
I think John talked about a guy from the east side. Imagine being a woman of a visible minority and an immigrant. So, and there's a model of leadership, the experiences and the people connect to leadership. And the further you are away from a white Anglo-Saxon male, the harder it is. And those are the more hurdles you have to pass to get to that position. So one is the denial of opportunity that occurs. Since we're talking about women, we'll leave the color issue for now. Let's just focus on women. There's a denial of opportunity for women. And then the women who do choose they get the opportunity, they choose to pursue it, there is not enough support. And as Anne mentioned and Jennifer mentioned, some women choose not to pursue. I mean, the feminist revolution was giving us a choice, and we have a choice now. And some of us decide to make the choice of pursuing leadership positions, and some says, I'm just going to take a couple years off. So these accumulate into what's keeping us behind. And, Catalyst Canada did a study in 2011. It was about Canadian women in leadership. And one of the statistics that stayed with me is they talked about, 48% of the law school graduates are women, 47% of the associates in law firms are women, but only 20% make partners. And managing partners, you can count them in fingers of one hand. So the attrition happened long before it came to the managing partner role. So the women were 50-50 in associates, and then it's 20-80. So 80% of the men are partners and only 20%. So this is something that's sort of summed it up for me, and this is true for law firms, any professional organization, any big firms. The other statistic that I read recently, it's by Center of American Progress, and they looked at statistical data of how the percentage of women in leadership roles is increasing. And they came up with when the leadership parity will be achieved by women in America is 2085. So we're talking about 70 years from now. And to give you the historical perspective, 70 years from now, Second World War was the first women who entered the workforce. So if you ask me the question, are we there yet? No, we're only halfway. So if we were traveling from Vancouver to Toronto, this was a journey. We've just left Moose Jaw and we headed to the Manitoba border. So no, we're not there yet. And there's lots of factors that accumulate. And, it's the bias, it's we choose not to, and if we choose and we do get the opportunity, there's not enough support. We talk about legislation of, putting women on boards. I think that's a great opportunity. We should have a code on the boards. But if you need a legislation that supports the largest number of women, there needs to be legislation and public policy on affordable and accessible child care and daycare.
You did nerve with that one. Thanks very much, Maninder. And Martha, why don't you wrap up our introductory remarks?
Well, first of all, I want to thank John for setting up and stepping up to provide us with a chair in this, because I think until we really get serious about studying it in a scientific and thoughtful manner, we're going to just be dancing around the head of the pin for quite a while. So it's great to have Jennifer here, and I want to thank John for his generosity. I have not studied this, and so all I can bring to this discussion is personal experience, and the experience I've had personally and have had in terms of watching other women, both in the public sector and in the corporate world. And while I find it very interesting thinking about all these issues, for me, in this situation, any kind of decisive or decision-making situation, there's a push and a pull. There's always a push and a pull. And what I've observed, and I guess I began to think about it more clearly when I read Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, which I know is a bit controversial, but it really spoke to me, that we have for years focused on the pull. We have focused on the legislation, the public policy, the discrimination, equity issues, fair pay, maternity leave, all the pull issues. What she says is we haven't really thought enough about the push issues, which to me are much more personal issues. And you know, if you think about it, I think men look at career decisions. And leadership is different than just being in the workforce. I want to focus on leadership. I think there is a difference between equity in the workforce and equity in leadership. And when men are embraced, if you like, or put in a position where there's a leadership opportunity, they just see the pull. They answer the call. It's very clear. It's a clarion call. It's an opportunity. That's what I'm meant to do. I go. What I have seen in both the public sector and now in the corporate world is that women need a push. And that push we don't do very well. We don't have the same networks. We don't have the same support systems. We don't have the same confidence. We don't have the same kind of ability to push ourselves across that line and accept the pull. The pull is there. I do believe the pull is there. I do believe boards are looking for women, corporations are looking for women. Women, it's a great time to be a woman. But I think it really is a matter of the push. And I'd like us to think about all the things that would help us as women push ourselves over that line to answer the call, if you like, to answer the pull.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. We've set things up. You talk about that pull. Anne, I just wanted to, if you could feed off some of Martha's remarks about using your own personal experiences when you've been presented with leadership opportunities. Was your reaction to run? Was it, I'm up for the kick? What goes through you? We can look at this panel. It's a power panel, successful women in leadership roles, and you assume that it's a natural. So tell me about that process.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. You know, I didn't really think I'd ever own a briefcase, for example, as a child. You know, that is kind of part of how you see yourself. I was fortunate to marry my best mentor, and promoter is not really the right word, is it? But my husband's always believed in me, and that, of course, we all have those 3 a.m. Hours of doubt, which sometimes last until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. My husband, Tony, has always believed that I could do what needed to be done, the task that was on offer, accept the pull. And a part of what he would tell me was, okay, this is a secret amongst all of us, right? All the stupid men that have made perfectly good careers doing exactly what I was being asked to do and seem to have done perfectly well at it. And also all the very capable women he knew that had turned down opportunities like this. And I don't really mean to say stupid men, but he convinced me that I was as good as, or I was able to do the task ahead of me. So that's kind of the micro answer. Many women that achieve leadership have a man who has helped them somewhere along the way, be it their father that has empowered them. And I think, Melinda, your father put that in your mind for you as a child, or a husband or a colleague. I know Bob Elliott, who's here, Elton, who's here, has done that for many women in this city. So that's kind of a micro answer. But on the macro answer, and this speaks to your point about what out there is advice, there are groups that have looked at this. For example, the Law Society convened a task force a few years ago, and I was on it, and we put together a toolbox. And the question we were asked to answer was, what was the business case for retaining women in the practice of law so they could become managing partners and partners? And we produced the business case for doing that. And we also produced a toolbox at the end of our business case, which is tools that firms could pick from in order to ensure that they were supporting the women to stay in the practice of law. And recently there's been a federal examination of what can be done to both push and pull. There was a report that just came out a couple of months ago, and I also served on that for us, which has ideas about how we can encourage both women to stay in corporate roles, in particular on boards, and boards to make room for them at the table.
Well, both Jennifer and John referred in your opening remarks to sort of our perception of leadership. What is a leader? What is the perception of leader, and what should it be? Jennifer, do you want to jump on that one? I know it's I know it's not a closed question, but what are some of those things that perhaps could be daunting?
A leader has to do three things in a company. You have to make sure you have the right people. You have to make sure you have the money. And you have to make sure that you have a vision, that you set a vision that people can adhere to. Who here thinks women can't do any of those things?
Yeah.
I mean, that is, I'm sorry, I'm simplifying, but I think women can do those three things. Sorry, I took Jennifer's.
Okay. That's good. Well, it's open to all.
No, I second that. I think that John also summarized about what a leader looks like and maybe where his degree comes from. And then there's that perceptual bias. Maninder also mentioned that the further away you are from that prototype, the more qualifications you have to have. So audit studies where you send resumes to the employer to find out who gets interviewed shows that women often have to literally have twice the qualifications than a man, and then same with minorities, and a female minority even worse. So you have to make up for that sort of seed of doubt that comes along with your identity, that it's not clear that you can really do this or that you fit the profile. So that's the problem again, but again, there's solutions to that problem, such as blind evaluations or evaluations in batches. So it's much harder to successively make 10 appointments to somebody who looks exactly the same than it does to make appointments in batches and recognize what kind of diversity you're bringing into the organization. So there are once we do understand these root causes, it is possible to come up with some common sense solutions to how to handle them and then study whether those work, and that process has definitely begun.
Martha, you wanted to
I
weigh
just
in?
wanted to share a funny little story that, I think there is something to what people perceive as leadership. And even within knowing that you're a woman leader, they have a perception of what women should look like who lead. I had an opportunity to meet a major donor who I had not met. He lived in Asia, and I had been appointed, and it was a big meeting, right? So he knows I'm a woman. He has my CV. He knows that, which of course was a bit of a shock. But I go into the hotel, go into the restaurant, and he and his wife are seated, and he graciously, kind of looks me up and down, and I could see him just looking so perplexed. And he said, excuse me, Dr. Piper. I'm just so sorry. I was expecting someone like Madeleine Albright. I didn't quite know what to say. I was very sorry that I had disappointed him.
So what should a leader look like? I mean, Anne had her criteria. What, in your opinion?
I really don't know. Some of the leaders that I have most admired have been people who, wouldn't necessarily fit any one stereotype. So I'm kind of intrigued with this. I mean, this is the first I've kind of heard that, and it did trigger my own, this one story, but I don't know. Do we really have those biases in what people should look like as leaders?
I think that's the problem, is we're trying to define what a leader looks like. Who cares what a leader looks like? It's what a leader acts like. And I think we're so concerned about, does this person have the gravitas? I've heard that a few times. And the answer is, who cares? What if they have incredible moral credibility that people wish to follow because they trust the leader? What if they're incredibly strategic and aspirational? I think those are the people you wish to follow because you have the most trust in them as leaders.
Is that happening?
I think it is starting to happen. And I think in many cases, yeah, of course it's happened. But there's other cases where, you know what, it's just the wrong leader in place. It just ticked all the boxes. It happened to be opportunistic, and you got the wrong person in place. But we don't do a good job of replacing the wrong leader quickly enough. And I think something that Martha was saying earlier I'd like to touch on, because I think it is very interesting for me personally. When I have a meeting to introduce a new opportunity for leadership among my own staff, my own people, inevitably I think it is true that the male that I'd be speaking to would say, great, thank you very much, send it in. When do I start? Whereas the women will all of a sudden start thinking about, well, I got to talk to my husband. I got to think about my kids. I'm not sure about the support network because my mom and dad don't live in the city. And then you go through all of these things and you realize those are all very legitimate. Whereas the guy never thought about it. He just assumed his wife and everyone else is going to be taking care of themselves while this is all going to happen. And send it in. Let's get going. I'll just send them an email about what just happened. And whereas, you've got, in the case of my discussions with women, it's about, I've really got to work this through. I've got to talk to many people. And I know that how we process things is different, men and women, but there's something more at stake here. And this is really what happens to me in my relationship with my husband, my children, what is expected of me as a woman. And so you go through all these conversations, and then you realize, frankly, I come back to the traditional organization is not set up to support what women need to take that great leap, which speaks to many of the things that you were pointing to that I'm not sure it needs to be legislated. I just think from a competitive perspective, smart corporations would take those steps. So from that perspective, I think that I'm always taken aback and reminded of the gender difference when it comes to the opportunity for leadership and how it's processed. And ultimately, it becomes an off-ramp. And there is, kind of one of the elephants in the room is spousal competition. This is going to be really hard on my husband if I have this, and well, frankly, I have this and he doesn't. That's going to create a whole new dynamic in my relationship. I've seen that quite a few times, unfortunately. So these are all sort of the realities that we're dealing with. So I think it goes far beyond the workplace itself. I hate to say it's society, but it is societal norms as well, and it drills right into the workplace in terms of how it manifests, the home, I should say, in terms of how it manifests itself.
Well, I'm curious that you kind of backed off from, well, I don't know if we need to legislate. Do we need to legislate percentage of board positions? Would that be one way of guaranteeing women's roles and women's presence on boards, for example, to say, oh, good corporations would do that anyway. Are they doing it? Apparently not, according to the statistics. So what kind of reaction do you get when you hear of a country that does legislate those kinds of board positions, for example? Anne, does anyone want to jump in on that? Maninder?
I would say that if we want to get there before 2085, we need to legislate.
Extreme. You need to go...
We need to make it faster. We need to get momentum. And it is, it's legislation and society, I would say they follow each other. You could start with one or start with the other, and they both work. So I don't think there's anything wrong with legislation.
Martha.
If you look historically, any major social issue that has really changed has required legislation. Whether it be civil rights, whether it be smoking, whether it's going to be the environment, they all require legislation. Now, is this a big enough? Is this one of those? I don't know. But I've come full circle on this. I don't know whether legislation is the right word. That always gets people nervous. But I have become a believer that unless you have a specific goal, a policy, something that holds the institution accountable, for better words, a diversity policy that is absolutely accepted and is part of your governance structure, you, with all good intentions, you will not move the needle. And I've certainly seen it. I have a few scars on my back. I've certainly seen it in the corporate world in my new life, that to get diversity policies into the governance structures for board diversity is not easy. But once it's there, and I see it now, because I'm on a board where we've pushed and we've gotten it, you force people, good-intentioned people. Everyone around that table cares about making sure women do well and so forth. They're not vindictive. There's not some terrible, ghost in the room that's saying we don't want women. Everybody will tell you, absolutely, absolutely. But then they start beginning to think about who they know and what might be there and what are the criteria, and it falls off the table very quickly. So with a policy, with a disclosable policy and the proxy that they absolutely have to address, I think it makes a huge difference, because we all know there are more than enough qualified women. That's not the issue. It's just recognizing them and putting the situation in place that acknowledges them and puts the opportunity before them. So, I've come full circle. You would have asked me this 10, 15 years ago. I would have said, no, we don't need that. I really do think we need it.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to that? John.
I differ. I have about 300 employees in the United States, and many of them are of African American descent. And because of our culture, we can have very open conversations about many things. And if there's one thing that many have resented, is the perception of equal opportunity rather than meritocracy. My fear, if you legislate, is that the people who have earned it to the top, their accomplishments have been diluted, because the perception is that they got there because of what they were, not who they were and what they accomplished. And I see it in their eyes, like they're literally shaking, saying, the one thing I love about this company is the fact that you're not judging me for that, because it never comes up. It's because of what I've accomplished. I see that more and more every time I go into the United States. And I actually really like where we've landed in Canada, where it's comply or explain. And that is, seek gender balance. And if you can't get there, then you're going to have to sit in front of the regulator and say why you couldn't get there. And that alone, without legislation, legislating a very specific number, has got people moving very, very quickly. I also know that in European countries where that legislation has gone in place, it's an open debate as to whether it's been successful or not, because people have been chasing gender as opposed to skills. And what they're finding is they're having to unwind some of the decisions that were made because they were racing against the clock to meet the quota, and they weren't getting the talent they should have got. I completely agree that the talent pool is there. No argument. But I think if you legislate it, I don't think you get to the right outcome necessarily.
Anne, you have some of the same concerns?
Yeah, I think legislation is one of the hammers. It's power. It's the exercise of power. But we already have in this room the power, and I'll tell you how we have it. Women buy shares and hold shares in their stock portfolio. I hope you're saving for your old age. You have shares and you own shares. You can write in, attend, put on ballots. You can get the companies that you hold shares in to consider the question and make a commitment and explain why they didn't make it. We're also consumers. Women are consumers. What's the number for how dollars are spent? Women control more than 50% of the dollars that are spent in Canada. We can demand that the companies that we buy from make a commitment to gender balance on their board and their senior management level, and if they don't achieve it, and they don't have a good story to tell, because I think there may be a story, then we can vote with our wallets. So I think legislation is something of a crude instrument. There's room for it. It's hard to legislate in Canada because we're 10 provinces three territories, one federal. It's very hard to legislate. But we have the power already. We're just choosing not to use it.
And why do you think that is?
Maybe we're looking for the right leader. Martha?
Well, I'd urge us all to go read Virginia Woolf's Room of One's Own. I mean, that book was written, in the 20s, and she said, it's a wonderful little monograph, but she said, what's the problem, ladies? We've had the vote now for 3 years. How come our parliament doesn't have half women? So while I agree we have power, we have never used it. We have never used it. Look at our parliament today. I read a statistic of how few women leaders there are in the world, in the major countries that are democracies. Women have had the vote forever. And yes, we own chairs. Yes, we buy things. But, I'm not comforted by the fact that somehow we're going to all rise up and vote for all the women candidates. And we're all going to rise up and put a shareholder proposal in, and then somehow we're going to change the company that way. I just don't see that we've had that kind of track record. And maybe shame on us, but to me, we've got to look for a different solution.
Okay, Jennifer. Yeah.
I would agree that solution assumes that women don't hold these same biases and assumptions, and that we have some collective feminist agenda that we can all act upon, and that just hasn't really come together. I think it's starting to come together a little bit more, and that more men are joining as allies in this, because it's in their best interest as well to promote gender equality for their own choices. And one of the legislation pieces that I think we need to look at more is fatherhood leave and fatherhood benefits. So we see, the highest number of board seats in Canada, in Quebec, occupied by women. We also see the most generous parental leave in Quebec for men. And you have significantly more men, perhaps you have the statistic handy, in Quebec way more men taking parental leave for much longer in Quebec than we have men taking parental leave elsewhere in Canada. So these things are all interrelated. So men's choices are affecting women's choices and vice versa. So I agree with the idea that most civil rights advances have been made through legislation. Perhaps we need to do that here in Canada. I worry that people would assume that it's not a meritocracy if you're legislating certain numbers of people on a board, but that assumption also means that women aren't as qualified as men to be on the board, and that they would only be there as women. We know that women have been in the workforce long enough that that argument doesn't really hold water. We know that there isn't a meritocracy right now, and that the legislation, or at least the Comply and Explain, is an attempt to get there, to try to get women's qualifications recognized. I attended an interesting talk in August at a conference in which somebody had interviewed board members about how do you select people onto the board, and they emphasized competence and qualifications, and you have to have been a CEO, you have to have done this and that and this and that, and that's why we don't have women on the board. And then they started looking at the men's backgrounds, and many of them didn't have those qualifications, but they were on the board. And so there's fascinating social science research on this. The constructed criteria paper that was done by Eric Oman and his colleagues is one of my favorites, where you give people 2 resumes. You have the man have more experience and the woman have more education, and you have people evaluate them and choose one. And if the man has more experience and the woman has more education, they choose the man, and they say, well, experience is really what matters, and that's why I'm choosing him. And if you give the man more education and the woman more experience, they choose the man, and they say, well, education is really what matters. And they're completely unaware that they're doing this. This is an implicit bias. And so, putting that criteria up first is, one of the solutions, and then selecting people first based upon that. So that could be another tactic.
Well, I'm glad you brought this up, because this afternoon I received an email from a former colleague of mine while you were on exactly this issue. Former CBC reporter, announcer type, who now runs his own company, he says, where he focuses, among other things, on increasing gender equality in the workplace. It has everything to do with how we perceive fatherhood and how we still ensnare men in traditional gender roles. The very short version of what the emerging data, including my own research with employers like Vancity and Clearly Contacts, is this. The glass ceiling will never be broken until we equally value men as parents and caregivers. The last 40 years has been a discussion about what it means for women to move into the workplace. We spent little to no time on what it has meant to men to be valued solely as breadwinners for so long and then have that stripped away. Progressive companies are starting to recognize the unique work-life integration that men are faced with, and they will, in my opinion, be the first to smash that ceiling. Gloria Steinem summed it up best when she said, "Women will not be valued outside the home until men are valued in it." Very good. I want to open this up to the floor, so I hope you have some questions. But first, I want to turn things over to Christina. You had a quick question to add? A tweet? Someone's tweeting?
I have the first question from Twitter. Yes.
Nice.
So the question is mentoring part of the solution, and is there any known research on that?
Can I direct this to John? Because I think it's interesting that you funded Jennifer's professorship at Sauder School of Business. So that probably has some basis in mentorship as well. Why don't we start with you?
I think mentorship is absolutely critical. There's no question. And when I think about the subject, I actually break it down into three. There's role models, which are positive or negative. There's mentors, which are inherently positive, and they're coaches. And then there's sponsors, people who take a great performer and sponsor that person into the next role. And when I take a look at people who are in positions of leadership, inevitably they've identified a number of role models, people who they want to emulate and those that they don't. Secondly, they've had at least one very good mentor in their lives, male or female. Usually it's been male because of the component of men in business. And then they've had to have an advocate or a sponsor when the opportunity arises. Someone pounding the table to say, I know that's the obvious choice, but you really have to take a look at this individual. And I do think, I want to come back to the institutional norms that are in place where I think one of the big problems that we have is, you have all these women in the workplace, but the male positions are still, the positions of management are still dominated by men, so it's men who are doing the promoting. And so they have a traditional view of what leadership looks like. And part and parcel of the problem is there might be people who will get natural mentorship because they fit the profile of what a future leader will look like. And so my fear is often that mentorship opportunities are lost for women and people of visible minorities because, again, they don't fit that traditional profile of what an emerging leader looks like. And so we spend a lot of time at our firm making sure that when we do interviews, the interview group is half men, half women. So now we're going to have a balanced dialogue about the individual that we're interviewing. When we look at mentorship, we implemented a program right across the country and, in fact, into the United States. We took a look at all of our high potential women who were excelling in their roles from the receptionist right through to people running books of business and leading clients. And we made available to them mentors. And it was really kind of interesting because many of the women actually wanted men as mentors. Part of it, I think, is the fact that they think by having a male mentor, they'll have a leg into the next role because it's that dynamic again, right? We were trying to figure that out, and it's kind of an interesting observation. I don't have an answer for it, but
Martha, I'm interested in you jumping in here because you did have some interesting observations about people that you have been involved with as a mentor and the kinds of things that especially the young women were interested in about work-life balance in particular, that being a priority for them, what they wanted to pick your brain about.
Well, I guess personally there's always been a key person in my life that's either not so much opened the door, but shoved me through it. And every career from the time, whenever I had an opportunity, and it's always been a man. It's always been a man. I'll tell you one story very quickly. When I was considering to be the position here at UBC, you know, the headhunters had come, and I, like most women, I don't know. You want me? I don't think so. You know, it's just too much, and I'd have to move, and my kids, and, you know, my husband's got a job, and, you know, I don't know. And I didn't know. And you can't talk to anyone, right? You really can't. But at the time, Don Mazankowski was on the board of the University of Alberta. And for those of you who don't know him, he's a national treasure. Wonderful, wonderful man. And I had gotten to know him on the board. One night, we're walking, this is Edmonton, middle of January. He walks me out to the car to unplug my car, which is the hardest thing to do, because you can't get the plug out because it's frozen, right? So he's unplugging my car for him, and I said, Don, I've got this dilemma. And I tell him. And he said to me, and I tell this to women all the time, he said to me, you know, Martha, he said, you go through life and you have lots of opportunities. But maybe once, if you're lucky, maybe twice, you'll have an opportunity that will never come again. And he said to me, if you want to be president, not just of any university, there are lots of universities out there you could be president of. If you want to be president of the University of British Columbia, it's now. It will never come again. You'll be too old. You won't be, you know, the next time around, da-da-da-da-da-da. It was like, wham, push. Okay. I never looked back. That, you know, was he my mentor? Absolutely. And you know, every one of my choices, there's been that push of a man. And similarly, when I see women now who come to me and ask me, should I do this, or I'm trying to recruit them to do something, it is unbelievable. They have every reason in the book why they can't do it. So much so that I could write it before they come in. And so mentors, people who believe in you, people who want to see you succeed, people, whether it's my husband was clearly, I mean, I'm with Ann. The most important mentor for me has been my husband. I always tell women, choose wisely, right? But, you know, every single woman that I have seen, not every single, but there's always somebody who is there to help you make that decision, support you in it, advocate for it, and ideally, what you've done, John, help you get to the point where opportunity knocks. So I'm a great believer. And I think we as women have to start stepping up and, holding out our hand and shoving our colleagues across the line.
I like the image. I like it. I do appreciate your patience at the microphone, but I do want to flesh out the mentorship because I think Ann Giardini has something she'd like to add to that discussion. We'll get right to you. Okay?
Two things. One of them really quick. Don Mazankowski is one of my mentors, too. He is a national treasure. But secondly, and we didn't know this, but secondly, there's this very narrow, specialized category of mentor, which I have done a lot of, and I suspect some of the others in the room have done, which is the the mentor that throws themselves across the door when the woman's walking out and says, no, you can't leave. And have you done that? Where, well, woman says, I'm voting myself off the island. I'm quitting the practice of law. I'm leaving the board. I'm quitting. I'm going to. And you physically, in my case, physically, really, have thrown myself into the door and said, no, you're not leaving. And let's solve the problem that's driving you out, as opposed to letting the problem drive you out. Yeah. And then you can get, and I don't know if you must have done that. Yeah. So it's not so much pushing people through the door, but then they try to get out again. And there's no door. No, there's no door here. There is no door. You may have thought there was a door when you came in, but actually it's a one-way thing. It just works one way. And that's a very narrow, and practically speaking, with lots of mentoring, but that has made the most difference, I think, that I've known of for many, many women, and they've been physically prevented from leaving. So,
okay. Before we move on, does anyone else want to add?
I just
okay,
wanted
Maninder?
to add another thing. For all the things, while everybody was talking, I was looking back at my life and coming up with, a dozen best things that ever happened to me. And they were a generosity of somebody, a role model, a mentor, a sponsor. Life is too short to reinvent the wheel. We can't do it. So somebody has done it. And it's both push and pull. And somebody just, you could just, Anne's one of the people that I just pick up the phone and say, hey, Anne, how's it going? This is what I'm thinking about it. And she'll tell you exactly what she thinks about it. And so I think it's crucial to have that support network and be that support network for others. And it's not just mentors above you in the hierarchy. It's below you, besides. So peers as well. We all need that support network. And I think women probably need more than men.
Okay. Jennifer, did you want to?
I would agree with everything that has been said in terms of my own experience as well, and male mentors playing a huge role in my life, and my husband as well, who's here in the audience supporting me still. But I would also like to speak to the subordinate part of the equation that you just tapped on. Research also shows that women in positions of power are more likely to be questioned or undermined or, experience, mistreatment that men in positions of power may not. They don't get that support from below. Their authority is more suspect, et cetera. So trying to encourage more mentoring or a work environment that supports women in positions of leadership at all levels, I think, would be a really important thing to do.
Okay. Thank you. And again, now we're ready for your question.
Thank you. Thank you for UBC alumni for putting up this event. It's amazing to see so many people tonight. In the spirit of dialogue, I want to make one quick comment and then a question. So I was very surprised that John said in the beginning that there's no solutions identified to this, and because I'm an economist and I've researched this for the last few years as one of the topics that I work on. And there's a lot of solutions actually, and you're the panel got through some of them, and you yourself identified quite a few. So there are solutions. I would say that the question really isn't to legislate or not legislate. You need to do both. In fact, there's three things I've identified that we need. One is policies to support women and families, so not just women but men, to participate in family life. So things like parental leave, also childcare was mentioned by one of the panelists. We need workplace flexibility, things like vacation time or sick time that's paid so people can actually be off work. And some of it might have to be legislated if there's not enough forward-thinking companies offering it on their own. But we also need cultural change in attitudes because we are still facing quite a bit of sexism at the workplace. You might have all heard of the RCMP sexual harassment class action suit, where 300 women or so working in the forest have come up with a serious allegation of sexual harassment. And every step, the management has dismissed them and shamed them in public. And as long as these attitudes persist, we're not going to see women in leadership. Now, my question here is that I've personally given lots of talks about women's and the gender gap and how many years it will take to close it. And all the talks, the composition of the audience is very similar to this one, 90 to 95% women. So my question is to John, but to anyone else who wants to address it, and it is, how do we get more men to be involved in this conversation?
Thank you for the question. I want to clarify one thing to your first point. My comment was there was very little research on how to solve for the problem. I think a lot of people will throw ideas like sticky notes on a wall saying if we took care of this daycare, if we did this parental leave, if we did this, you're not getting actually to a cohesive solution for a very ingrained problem. You're in my mind, you're just sort of filling holes in the dam, but the dam is bursting. And so you have a more structural issue to deal with. So one of the things that, and so you're absolutely right, those are things that you have to deal with. However, there's a bigger problem. It's a cultural issue. And how do you dig deep into an organization, decades old, centuries old, to change it's cultural DNA to understand the importance of diversity and how to get there in a very sustainable way. So it doesn't, because often these things get put in place and then the next cost-cutting program that comes through, it's the first thing to go because it's deemed a benefit. So those are sort of the things that I would point to that go beyond just, if we just did these 5 things, we would solve for the issue. I can assure you you're not going to solve for the issue. It's just a temporary fix, and it's a feel-good exercise. It's a bigger issue than that. I will also say when it comes to men being involved, I can assure you also that men get it. Certainly, the people that I work with, if they're in their 40s and 50s, even people in their 60s, frankly, they have daughters and they have children, they want to see their children succeed. They get it. But a lot of the research from a male's perspective is that, you know, you're white, you're male, you're the problem. And so from that perspective, you're saying, okay, guilty as charged. I'm not sure what I did, but guilty as charged. And I'm saying, can we just tell me what I did? Just tell me what I did. Because if there's these hidden biases in place, I want to know about them so that, you know, so that we can win. I don't show up to work to show up for work. I show up to work because I love winning with the people I work with. And we actually really want to be the best in the world. And if you want to be the best in the world, then you have to have the very best people at the table. And if you want the very best people at the table, you've got to draw from your entire pool of talent, whether they're male, female, white, black, or of any other color or any other religious background. So what is it that is preventing us from doing it? Men and women within our organization are asking that question honestly and very sincerely. So I think there's a bigger issue here, and that is how can we get the right resources spent on an organization to deal with the very, I'd say, ingrained DNA problem of a corporation. It's a big, big deal. And so I would counter that men are absolutely engaged in this discussion.
Well, let's go to a man at the microphone right now. And,
Perfect.
No pressure.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, my name is William Hall, and I'm a man, and I'm a recent graduate from UBC. And I've just really enjoyed this presentation. One of the things that I really picked up on is the solutions. How can we improve this and make it better? And as a young person coming out into the workforce, see a lot of things like pensions, benefits, drying up, a lot of part-time rather than full-time work. And it seems like a lot of solutions that we're talking about cost money. Childcare costs money. Paternal leave all costs money. And all the other things too. So my question is, how can we put forward a business case to corporations and businesses that demonstrates the value to them of investing in these types of things, and then what kind of science and academic research can we put behind that to support it?
Who would like to tackle that one on a corporate level?
I'm not sure I fully heard what you said.
Do you want to repeat the question?
The cost to men part?
Sure. So a lot of these solutions cost money.
And can you be more clear about what you mean by that?
Sure. So additional child care benefits, or to get stipends or extra money so you can get someone to take care of your kids, or as a man, if you have a child, being able to stay at home, you need someone to replace their paternity leave. Additional training programs or mentorship programs. I think these are all things that take resources. And from what I've seen, a lot of resources are drying up, and like John was saying, they're being cut. So how can we make sure that, or how can we make this a priority, and how can we make the business case and perhaps say that, well, you can be making more money if you invest in these things perhaps in the long term. How do we make that case, and then how do we support it with academics and research? That's my question.
Well, we can point to the heavy losses that we face in various disciplines of the very best trained talent who leave because someone doesn't block the door. So that's a huge business cost. It could be quantified. I believe it has been in many sectors. And I'm not quite sure what you mean about it costs men to have childcare, because men have children too. So, it's a benefit that anybody who's a parent would have in the organization. It might cost the organization money, or if we go into legislation or government that supports that or subsidizes that somehow, because it is a collective good to raise the next generation. And that could be another, benefit that corporations in Canada have, is that there's, good public schools and childcare available. The leaves are also an investment in an employee that you want to come back, right? Who you think is highly valuable, or a flexible work schedule. So the business case is definitely out there. The business case has been made. It's just frustrating that it doesn't seem to be resolving the problem so well to make that business case. Part of it is because there is this more cultural set of assumptions that are going against those norms, those cultural norms.
Martha? Well, just very simply, I think, you look out there in the global environment, I think it touches on John's arguments, as particularly a country like Canada that has, 30 to 40 million people. We have got to use every single talented person we have in order to compete. If you look at the number of scientists and engineers that are being educated alone, around the world, we have got to use every single person that has been educated to their maximum. So the public case here in Canada, where public education is supported by the government, is that you've educated all these people. And, goodness, just go to UBC in the fall convocation, John, and you'll watch who wins the gold medals consistently. But forget gender a minute. We cannot afford to educate them on the public purse and then not utilize that for reasons of either family, other discriminatory practices, or just barriers. So I think Jennifer's right. In a country like Canada that depends so much on public education, the case has been made. The question that you have to ask is, how do we ensure that, every single educated person, and we aren't educating enough, we need to educate even more, and even at higher levels, but how are they employed, not just for a couple years, and this answers Anne's point of kind of the ramp off, but can be employed consistently for, I hate to tell you, not for 30 years, not for 40 years, but probably 50 years, because we're aging and we have to keep people employed. So I think the business case is so obvious in a country like Canada, and it's been made very, very well, I think, and it's really an issue of us stepping up and ensuring that every single person that is able to benefit from an education is also able to contribute to society in a productive and fulfilling way.
Martha, I agree. I think there's been a shocking lack of will to take some of the bold steps from a corporate perspective. And I do think your point's actually a very good one. It all comes down to costs. And I'm often stunned, looking at an incredibly well-intended organization that I would say the Royal Bank is in this case, the inherent discussion about how costly will it be to implement this program. And I know they're not the only ones having this conversation. Everyone is, because it's very costly. I also know that we had one of our first cases of an individual wanted to take paternal leave for a year, and that individual was in my office literally crying, saying, what is this going to do for my career? And I'm looking at him like, nothing. It's fine. You're fine. He goes, but what about, how is everyone going to judge me? We haven't gone through, even as an individual level, to make choices with confidence, saying, damn the consequences, this is the right thing to do for me and my family. So there is so much more that I think we have got to do. It's obvious that that's the case, but I'm actually quite concerned if we're looking forward 10, 15, 20 years and you look at the demographic trends with a massive drop-off in people with retirement age and not much coming up behind it, that you're going to have to draw on all of your resources as a country as small as ours to be competitive in any industry. And if we don't get this right sooner rather than later, we're going to find ourselves a banana republic from my perspective in a relatively short period of time. And that was, again, one of the reasons for the genesis of the professorship, because I'm just, on a personal level, very deeply concerned about the future of our country if we don't get it right.
That's going to be our next dialogue. Saving Canada. Okay.
I'll say something about this issue. Yep. And I had a very recent experience of this, where I helped a very highly visible minority woman moved to a small town where we have a mill. So she's got 2 counts against her. She's a woman and she stands out in that town, let me tell you. And she's performing a service, and she promptly has 3 babies. Well, not all at the same time, but... and so the manager, I helped her move there, and you know, I feel somewhat guilty, although I'm not responsible for this. And the manager says, that's a bit of a problem, because she has a specialized skill set. She's hard to replace. It's in Alberta, where it's hard to get skills. And we have a problem. And I loved that he used the word we. And I realized the problem isn't that she's gone there and had 3 babies. The problem is that I have to help him manage through this very concentrated period of time in her career, and his, when this is all going to be a little difficult. Because then she will likely be, there solidly happy, for years and years and years. So I had to help him find the solutions and the tools. And I'm not sure we spend enough time at that level of manager to say, how am I going to ensure that you can manage through these transient, temporary periods of time when we have to provide supports and we have to give them a toolbox to work with. And so that's exactly what we did. We pulled together resources and we didn't leave him isolated with that issue. So it can be done, but there's cost to it, yeah.
And did she stay, or did she say, yeah, I'm out of here?
Well, we're only on mat leave 3, so
okay.
Tune in same time 2 years from now.
I understand the risk there in them. Okay, let's go to the microphone at the back of the room, sure.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Scott, and I'm a proud recipient of a PhD in education 2011 from Faculty of Education at UBC. I'm humbled and inspired by the panel and my friends here. From Anne, what resonates is this spirit of an independent woman. From Meninder, we need support. And from Martha, the push to answer the call. Power literacy, for me, is the call. I'm running for Vancouver City Council. I'm the only new female candidate for the NPA. I'm so excited. And my question is for those of you who have daughters, what is your advice for young women and how will they find the best mentors? Thank you.
Advice for the daughters. Who'd like to pick up with that one?
Yeah, I've got 2 daughters. They're sitting right there.
Okay. Listen up.
They usually give me advice, but advice for daughters, I guess. What kind of advice do I give?
Make your bed.
Follow your heart, I guess, is usually my most consistent piece of advice, and stand up for what you believe in. And I try to be a role model too. I guess that would be a form of advice, is being a role model and trying to show them how I struggle through my demons or my self-doubt, and finding other people that they admire, to seek out for that kind of support and potentially mentorship and even sponsorship. So that would be my advice.
I have a 19-year-old daughter who's a student at UBC, and she was born empowered. She's got her own voice and her own energy, and has never, to my knowledge, taken an ounce of my advice. But every now and again, I overhear her talking to third parties, other people. I'm a lawyer, other people. And something that I said 10 years ago will come out of her mouth. So, they listen. They do listen and they absorb. And so it's how you live your life. They're watching. They're watching.
Anybody else want to add to the advice for young women?
I don't have a daughter, but if I did, I would give the advice the same that my dad used to give me. And he said, don't count yourself out of the race till you actually get to the start line. And the second one, if there's 1,000,000 chance of this happening, why can't it happen for you? You're as good as anybody else.
Good one. Good one. Hi, why don't you?
Thanks. I just wanted to raise the flag for manly women and feminine men, lest we be too binary about this discussion. I think sometimes women face a real catch-22. which is that especially at the lower levels, when you need approval from the masculine men who are in leadership, that you need to be a leader but in a very feminine way. So, for instance, there's all those studies about how if you wear makeup, you're more likely to be advanced or viewed as professional. And I wondered if you might have some thoughts on that. Particularly, perhaps, Martha, you spoke about being expected to be Madeleine Albright. Maybe that's okay, be Madeleine Albright.
Is that a question? I mean, are you?
Well, I mean, yeah. What do we do? What are the...
I think here's my advice. Somebody, I remember after I was appointed, my best friend, I got scared, which I was telling Gloria, leadership is very scary. There's no question about it. And I just said, oh my goodness, now I've got this job. What am I going to do? How am I going to... Yeah. And she said to me, and this is the advice I would, just be Martha. And I think if, you know, it's probably the best advice. In fact, she did a little calligraphy and it sits over my desk. And, you know, if you are true to yourself and you have your own style and you feel comfortable in how you present yourself, it doesn't matter if you wear a lipstick or you have, you know, you dress in power suits or you wear something kind of edgy, or as long as it's you. If you try to be somebody different, that's where you get into trouble. So just be true to yourself. Know who you are. Know what makes you feel comfortable, what makes you... You know, Eleanor Roosevelt, a great mentor of mine. Mentors don't have to be alive. I've read every book that you can read on Eleanor Roosevelt. So anybody wants to talk about Eleanor, come see me. But she actually said, and those of you, you're all too young, but if you don't know who she is or who she was, you should look her up on the internet, because she was quite an interesting woman of her time. And she said, you know, women who lead feel beautiful. Now, if there was a woman who probably wouldn't categorize in any category as beautiful, it was Eleanor Roosevelt. But she felt beautiful, right? She felt comfortable with herself. So I think that's the key. Nice. Just feel comfortable.
Well, I think you were our probably unintentional last question. It's a tremendously enriching discussion, and we can continue it, as I said, at the reception after we wrap up the panel. And as we do that, I guess I'd like to ask each of the panelists to come up with one brief takeaway for the people who have spent the last hour or so here. Something tangible, maybe just something emotional, something that you've learned from your own personal experience, their takeaway. Jennifer, can I start with you?
Well, I guess I'll end on a positive note.
Please do.
I started on the Debbie Downer, we're born into a world run by men, but the world is changing, and the next generation is being, you know, born into a different world. Women are now representing 25 to 30% of primary breadwinners in Canadian families, 40% in U.S. families. Gender roles are changing. Both men and women are now facing more freedom and choice in terms of what they do and how they spend their time. So I think that's all very positive, and we are starting to reshape those stereotypes, and hopefully we can keep the dialogue going, keep the research on best practices and what works and what kind of interventions and systemic interventions, not just the little plugging the holes in the dam interventions, and what really works to help advance that a little bit faster than the next 70 years.
Okay, good positive takeaway. Anne Giardini.
All right, I'm going to give two practical tips. One from my mother, who was quite successful in her own right. And to girls, she would say, as you go through life, always be as intelligent as you are. So there's often a tendency among girls, young women, to giggle and step back and doubt. But we have an inherent intelligence, especially if you've gone to a great university like UBC. And so go out and be as intelligent as you are. So that's one piece of advice. The second one is very practical. I learned this early in my career. you'd walk past a room where the men were gathering and talking about something important or interesting, or what you thought was probably important or interesting, and you wondered how were you going to get in that room? Because you were busy outside there being as intelligent as you could possibly be, and it still wasn't working. And so I discovered this great trick, which was to volunteer to take the minutes. And nobody ever wants to take the minutes. And all of a sudden they have this person who's going to come in, and then you're in the room. And you can't get into the dialogue, into the discussion, make a change unless you're in the room. So get in the room.
Take the notes. Awesome advice. John?
I'll just go back to the genesis of the professorship. When Dana, my wife, and I decided to make this gift to the University of British Columbia, it's actually not named after myself, it's named after my mother. My mom had a grade 3 education, and she was really proud to be Canadian. And as Dana and I would say, that she was way ahead of her time. She had incredibly sage advice for my sister, for myself. But the one thing that she did that was really interesting, that exhibited leadership in her own right, was she took a job. And so when you come from, back in the 60s and 70s when you immigrated from Italy, and as a woman you took on a job, what you were saying quietly is that your husband can't provide for your family. And I remember over the dinner table, countless arguments between my mother and my father, my dad saying, this is bringing shame to me. And she goes, Sal, you know you make enough. I know you make enough. The kids know you make enough. Get over it. And she said, I'm in Canada now, and I want my own money. And she took a job at the coffee mug at the Bay. She was flipping hamburgers. And, and it was such an incredible example to see a woman stand up in a patriarchal environment and say, no, I'm going to own my own outcome. And so when I think about the gift, I always think about my mother, because I think here she was, grade 3, couldn't speak the language, stood up to my dad, who was a minor, and just said, get over it. And she owned her own outcome. So I guess that's where I would come back to, is if you believe you're operating in an environment that is a meritocracy, then own your own outcome. Demand that you become a leader if you think you're the right leader of an organization. Demand it. Ask for the job. And so from that perspective, I don't see that enough. I don't see enough people saying, you know what, damn it, I'm qualified. There's an opening, tell me why I'm not good for this job. And maybe you might have to have the same conversation with your husband. Just saying.
Own it. Okay. Maninder?
I think, okay, I lost my train of thought. That story. I just wanted to say that, we talk about all the problems that are, still facing us. But if we look at the past, the progress is being made, and it's more and more every year that goes by. And the young people that are growing up now, I mentor a couple of young women in their late teens, and they have a really different perspective of what's possible for them. So it is getting better and better. And I have some friends in their 60s and 70s, and I can see the change. I'm in the middle of the process now. But what I would like to see, and there's all these women in the room, I think we need to tweak that definition of success. Right now we're talking about having a woman on the board is success. We need to ask about how many women are on the governance committee, the executive committee, the chair of the board. That should be the measure. It's not enough to be on the bus. It's not enough to be sitting towards the front of the bus. Is a woman driving the bus? I think that is a true measure, and that's why change is not happening, because there's too much window dressing. And I realize it's a first step, but we need to, the next dialogue that here, I think we need to look at the number of board chairs and CEOs, and not be, one of the 36 members of the board that are polled for an opinion when something needs to be passed.
Good.
We need to be driving the bus.
Head to the front of the bus. Nice. Okay.
Driving the bus.
Okay, driving the bus. Martha?
Well, I was lucky to grow up in a 3-generational household. My father's father lived with us. There were 4 kids in my family. I wasn't the firstborn. I'm in the middle. But my grandfather moved in when I was about 12 years old, when my grandmother died. And he became a very important figure in my life. He was a judge. He had a university education, and he was quite educated for his time. And he was a man of generous spirit. But he enjoyed two things. He enjoyed cigars and he enjoyed good cars. And he drove a Cadillac, which in those days was a pretty special car, which my father would never be seen in. But he had one piece of advice he used to say to me, and this is my piece of advice to you. And it was always, always carry jumper cables in your car. Now, some of you probably don't even know what jumper cables are, but, and he said this because he had a good car. He had a really good car that never broke down. But he thought it was his duty and responsibility to push that next person forward who might be stalled in the road. So my advice to all of you, who I thank you deeply for coming and spending your afternoon here, and I thank you even more for going to UBC. My advice to all of you is to use your strengths and your talents and the good graces that have been given to you to help others, to help other women move ahead, to help each other make that jump, because I think we do need a jolt. And I do think the jolt has to come from within. More than waiting and blaming others, I think the jolt has to come from within. And I think we are the best jumper cables and the best energizers of each other that we could possibly hope for. So always, always carry jumper cables in your car.
My car is 15 years old, and I have a pair of jumper cables in the trunk. And I know how to use them, too. Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you, again, for spending this evening with us. I hope that you have found in some way some takeaway that you can take back to your work environments or your home environments, and we can move this whole issue forward. A big round of applause, please, for our wonderful panel. I'll turn things back over to Jeff.
And a big round of applause for Gloria for doing such a great job. Thank you. Fantastic. And really, what a fantastic way to start off this dialogue year. So thank you again for a tremendous conversation. And I do want to reference the fact that this discussion is going to be made available on a podcast on the digital library. So I invite you to go to the Alumni UBC website, and you can download this podcast and lots of other content that would be of interest. I also want to point out of a couple of other things coming up that on September 16th, next week, we hope you'll join us for our Alumni UBC annual general meeting at the Fairmont Waterfront Hotel. UBC's new president and vice chancellor, Arvind Gupta, is going to be our guest of honor, and so it'll be an opportunity to hear from our new president and vice chancellor. And we're also going to celebrate the amazing progress of Alumni UBC, because after all, it's yours. For the fashion conscious in the audience, we want to invite you to join us on September 23rd for a very special night. It's Fashioning Cancer is a night of art and music in support of cancer prevention. The cocktail party is at the Porsche Center, Vancouver. It's going to include a live auction of beautiful dresses and performances by Canada's Queen of Punk, Biff Naked. And proceeds from the fundraiser are going to support the Canadian Cancer Society's cancer prevention program at UBC. For our young alumni, join us at our Your Next Step event on October 21st at the Roundhouse, when we learn what do employers really want. And also we want to encourage you to save the date for our next dialogue on November 25th, where we'll debate our right to die. So for a complete list of activities, just always go to alumniubc.ca. There's always activities going on. And Anne, in deference to you, since we have SFU's Chancellor on the panel this evening, I'd like to, on behalf of our SFU colleagues, invite you to an event that they have coming up. And it's the former Prime Minister Kim Campbell, who I might add is a graduate of UBC, and a recipient of an honorary doctorate from the SFU, is going to speak about increasing women's voices in public debate and discourse, both in politics and in the broader public discourse. And she's going to be speaking on Friday, November 14th, with the former Vancouver Sun columnist Sherry Graydon, who herself is an alumnus of both UBC and SFU. I could have let the SFU part off, but and that will be at the SFU Harbor Center. So we invite you to visit the SFU website for that information. Finally, how many of you have A cards in the audience? Any of you? Ah, that's great. All right. Well, if you've not signed up for an A card, and it's free, I'm going to invite you to do so. We have a table in the back, and they can share with you all of the benefits of the A card, and there are a number of things. So we invite you to get your A card today. So I want to thank our partners again, Scotiabank, CBC, and the Forum for Women Entrepreneurs, and to all of you for joining us tonight, in person and online. And for those of you in the room, with apologies to those of you who are online, I'm going to invite you now to join us and our panel for a complimentary reception where we can continue this great dialogue. Thanks again for coming.